Okay, now, I mentioned sovereign debt crisis. You start talking about the euro, but we're also talking about, really, the sovereign debt crisis as it applies to the eurozone, the UK, the United States, and other countries around the world. We've already seen a sovereign debt implosion in Iceland. And you're also talking about the way that money moves around the world, the hot money. When you're talking about the carry trade, what you're talking about is hot money. The money that is free-floating, controlled by sovereign, apolitical hedge funds that are looking for high rates of return, and they're able to move money really fast. And right now, they're attacking the euro because of all of the underlying fundamental decay in their ability to service their debts. But going forward, if all of these currencies have leprosy, the United Kingdom, the dollar, the euro, to name three, and the Japanese yen or the Swiss franc, if all these currencies have leprosy, in the end, which one is going to be really the most terminally affected and probably be the worst off?
Well, that's uncertain. There may be quite a number. But the dollar is the most vulnerable because it's the reserve currency. And so it is the basis of central bank reserves for all the other countries. And it's very difficult to have as a reserve currency the currency of a country that has massive, apparently never-ending budget deficits.
We're seeing the U.S. Treasury last week coming to market with an auction, and it was not well sponsored. Some have actually suggested that Treasury market bond last week in the U.S. failed. Did it fail technically in your opinion?
You know, the Federal Reserve always stands there to purchase the bonds in the event the bids don't cover the offering. And what we do know, I think, is that the budget deficits of the United States this year and next year exceed by a large amount the trade surpluses of the trading partners of the United States, so they cannot be financed as they have in the past by the recycling of budget surpluses from China and Japan and the OPEC countries. So the financing is a problem now in a new way, and I think last year, they were financed by the Federal Reserve taking toxic assets off the hands of the banks, creating for them bank reserves, which the banks then use to purchase the debt. I don't know how long this can continue, but last year the budget deficit was financed by the deterioration in the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. So how far can the balance sheet of the Fed deteriorate and it still be looked at as the central bank of the reserve currency?
Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, isn't it true also that last year and the year before we started to see the U.S. government disguising themselves as hedge funds in places like the Cayman Islands and buying debt in itself? There's an enormous amount of fraud going on there, isn't that true?
Max, I don't know, because they can rely on the Fed to buy it for them. And when they have all these toxic assets on the hands of the banks that the Fed has taken off of their hands and then giving them bank reserves, they can then, in effect, what's going on is a swap of new Treasury debt for the toxic assets.
Right, we understand that. So all of the bad debt from the banks on Wall Street are swapped with the Fed. The bankers get fresh Treasury bills. They pay themselves huge bonuses. The Fed gets stuck with all this toxic debt. They go to foreigners to refinance, and the foreigners are saying, we don't want your junk anymore. And now they're having to buy their own debt. They're eating their own dog food, so to speak. They're basically having to eat their own vomit in a lot of ways, I think, to put it more precisely. And they're choking on that. There's a gag reflex. They're not able to buy their own vomit bonds anymore, it would appear.
Well, at some point, it just results in direct printing money. And since the dollar is already suspect, and since the debt of the United States is already huge and will be growing. You know, if they have to raise the debt ceiling this year, they'll have to raise it next year or the year after. They're not. It's not the last of it, and so then the question is, aren't we faced with a breakdown in the reserve currency system such that the international payments mechanism falls apart, and that the dollar would not be used to settle international accounts? The United States would not be able to pay for the excess of its exports over of its imports over its exports, and the many of the poorer countries who rely on gifts and loans of dollars would just be out the window as well.
Oh, does that include Israel?
You know, that's the whole key, perhaps.
How is that the key, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts? If the dollar loses its reserve currency and you're not able to give money away to these countries in aid, and to countries in aid like Israel, by the way, they have a nuclear program which is in direct contravention to international law. You're not allowed to receive aid and have a nuclear program at the same time. But you're saying that the collapse of the dollar would also interfere with America's gifting of billions to Israel. How is that a big problem?
Yes, well, you see, it's not a problem. It may be the hope for peace that if the dollar, you see, who's financing our wars are the foreigners who lend us the money. And so if the dollar loses its reserve currency role, they're not going to lend us the money.
When China says we don't like America's policies relating to Taiwan and we're going to therefore withhold purchases of U.S. Treasury bonds, aren't they using bonds like a weapon, weaponized Treasury bonds?
They have that option. They most certainly have that option. They are our biggest creditor, and they certainly have the option to use that power. And I don't know, when they will do this, but if we keep pushing them as we keep adding to unsustainable debt levels, at some point they have to use the weapon.
Okay, so you're suggesting that the best hope for peace in the U.S. is that America goes bust and the dollar collapses, and that Israel's not in a position, therefore, to keep operating that enormous million-strong ghetto called Palestine that apparently they replicated from all the lessons they learned in World War II and their subjugation. Now, let's talk about famed banker and investor Barton Biggs. He's advising the rich to stockpile farmland, food, seeds, and guns. Now, we all know Barton Biggs. You know Barton Biggs. I know Barton Biggs. He's a Wall Street legend. He loves to write. He's got a new book out. Now, Dow Jones Market Watch commentator says only a new American revolution can end the occupation by the banking class. What are your thoughts about the possibility of a new American revolution and Barton Biggs' idea that everyone has to basically buy tinned beans and guns?
Well, that's a logical implication of the kind of irresponsibility that we are seeing displayed by the United States government. They first deregulated the financial sector, unleashed greed, unleashed unimaginable debt leverage, created a crisis, and then bailed out the people who were the problem, the people who had created the crisis, and left the rest of the people suffering, continuing to go down, to lose the houses, to lose jobs. And so it is historically, it is the type of situation that produces a big reaction on the part of populations. Whether or not this will happen to the American one is unclear. Many of the people are just sort of insouciant. They don't have much understanding of what's happening to them or what's going on, and the government currently is trying to keep all these appearances that we have a recovery. They're producing growth numbers that are reassuring, and they probably are intervening against the euro in order to strengthen the dollar. We have this plunge protection team, so you can't ever tell exactly why anything is happening in the markets, whether it's another temporary rigging So there
Yeah,
is.
okay. Let's talk about the plunge protection team for a second, because after the crash of 1987, which I believe happened on your watch under Reagan,
I was long gone.
You were long gone. Okay. But the plunge protection team, now when the crash happened in 1987, Robert Rubin, Alan Greenspan, and Ronald Reagan got together, and they created what was called the Working Group on Finance at the time. The next day, October 20th, 1987, the government went into the market. They bought S&P futures as a way to support the market. They violated everything anyone held dear in terms of free market capitalism. The government was now playing the market. Now, a lot of people doubt that that happened, and that is indeed what goes on every single day with the PPT, plunge protection team, getting stronger every day. Isn't it? It's true, right? This is exactly what happened, and it's getting stronger. Isn't that true?
I would imagine that it is getting stronger because it's the investment banks that control United States economic policy, and they really have, I think, since the Clinton administration.
Okay,
So,
well, actually, we're actually running out of time, but